The refugee camp on Proxima Station stretched for kilometers, a maze of prefabricated shelters and desperate hope. Burak walked through the crowded pathways, his boots echoing against the metal grating. He wasn't supposed to be here. Humans rarely ventured into the Zorvathi sectors anymore, not after the war had left their homeworld a charred wasteland. But Burak had never been good at following rules. He carried a crate of protein rations, contraband by station law. The Galactic Council had declared the Zorvathi combatant civilians and restricted their aid to minimum subsistence levels. It was a death sentence dressed in bureaucratic language. The Zorvathi had violet skin that shifted in hue with their emotions, and large eyes adapted for their world's dim red sun. Now those eyes watched him from every shadow, filled with suspicion and hunger. Burak moved deeper into the sector, following coordinates sent by an anonymous contact. He found the shelter at the camp's edge, barely more than a corrugated metal lean-to. Inside, the darkness was absolute. "Hello?" he called softly. A shuffling sound answered him. Then he saw her. The girl was tiny, perhaps 7 or 8 by human standards, though Zorvathi aged differently. Her skin had faded to a sickly pale purple, and her arms were thin as circuit wires. She stared at him with eyes too large for her gaunt face. Burak's heart clenched. He'd seen war footage, read casualty reports, but nothing prepared him for this. "Hey there," he said, kneeling down and setting the crate aside. "I brought food." The girl, Melissa, according to the dossier his contact had sent, didn't move. Her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "It's okay," Burak continued, opening the crate slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you. See? Protein bars, nutrient paste, even some dried fruit." Melissa's nose twitched at the scent, but she remained frozen against the wall. Her small hands clutched a torn blanket. Burak pulled out a protein bar and unwrapped it, breaking off a piece. He placed it on the ground between them and slid it forward. "For you," he said simply. Melissa's eyes darted from the food to his face, then back again. Slowly, painfully slowly, she crept forward. Her movements were those of a wild animal, ready to bolt at the slightest threat. She grabbed the piece and shoved it into her mouth, barely chewing before swallowing. Then she looked at him again, those enormous eyes welling with something Burak couldn't quite identify. "More?" he asked gently. He broke off another piece. This time, Melissa took it from his hand directly. Her fingers were cold, trembling. They sat like that for several minutes, Burak feeding her small portions. He knew better than to let her eat too much too quickly. Starvation made digestive systems fragile. "Where's your family?" Burak asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Melissa's skin flickered darker for a moment. Grief, he'd learned. The Zorvathi wore their emotions on their skin. "Gone," she whispered in heavily accented standard. "Skyfire took them." The orbital bombardment. Burak closed his eyes briefly. The war had been brutal, both sides committing atrocities, but the Zorvathi had lost everything. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Melissa studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You are human." "I am. Humans killed my world." Burak didn't flinch from the truth. "Yes, some of us did." "Why you help me?" It was the question Burak had asked himself 1,000 times. Why risk imprisonment to smuggle food to enemy refugees? Why care when the galaxy had moved on? "Because it's right," he said finally. "Because you're just a kid, and you shouldn't suffer for what adults did." Melissa tilted her head, considering. Then, without warning, she lunged forward and wrapped her skeletal arms around his neck. Burak froze, startled. The girl buried her face against his shoulder, her whole body shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing me." Those words hit Burak harder than any weapon. For seeing me. Not for the food. Not for the charity. For acknowledging her existence when the rest of the galaxy had decided she and her people were invisible. He carefully wrapped his arms around her fragile form. I see you, Melissa. You matter. She sobbed then, great heaving cries that seemed too large for her small body. Burak held her, letting her release months of terror and loss and loneliness. When she finally pulled back, her skin had shifted to a lighter shade, almost lavender. Hope, he realized. She was showing hope. Will you come back? She asked. Burak thought of the risks, the patrol schedules he'd memorized, the bribes he'd have to pay. He thought of his own safety, his career, his life. Then he looked into those enormous eyes and saw not an alien, not an enemy, but a child who needed him. I'll come back, he promised. Every week I'll bring food. And maybe someday we'll find a way to get you out of here. Melissa's face transformed with a smile, the first he'd seen from her. Humans are strange, she said. The galaxy says you are monsters, but you are here, in the dark, feeding a monster's child. You're not a monster, Burak said firmly. Neither are your people. The real monsters are the ones who let children starve. He spent another hour with her, talking quietly, sharing the supplies he'd brought. Before he left, Melissa caught his hand. In my language, she said, we have a word. Thesura. It means one who carries light into darkness. You are Thesura, Burak. The human felt his throat tighten. Thank you, Melissa. As he made his way back through the camp, Burak's resolve hardened. One child fed wasn't enough. One promise kept wouldn't change the galaxy. But it would change Melissa's world. And maybe, just maybe, that was where changing the galaxy began. One act of defiance against cruelty, one moment of compassion in the darkness, one human deciding that all lives mattered, even those the powerful had deemed expendable. Behind him, in a small metal shelter, a Zorvathi girl clutched a protein bar and smiled, her skin glowing with the faint lavender of hope renewed. The stars didn't care about their story, but they would remember it anyway.